Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, March the 5th. The story of what we thought happened with Keir Starmer, Diego Garcia and international law has been turned on its head. Was the Prime Minister in favour of helping Donald Trump with the attacks on Iran, but deterred by members of his own cabinet? Stand by for some rapid rewriting of history. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. That's right. The Spectator's Tim Shipman today reports that as late as last Friday, the Prime Minister was more open than he's told us to date about allowing Donald Trump to use the bases at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford to launch the attacks. But he faced what Tim presents as a cabinet revolt led by Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, also include Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper, as well as facing down the legal advice, or having to face the legal advice from Attorney General Lord Hermer. And all of this changes the kind of essential presentation, the essential political story that we thought we were telling this week, which is, or has been up until this point, of a Prime Minister yoked inflexibly to international law, and instead suggests that domestic politics, including specifically internal Labour dynamics all the way up to the cabinet, were much more at play determining where this government ended up.
That is the fascinating framing of this. And according to Tim's piece, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, backed the Prime Minister over the potential use of the British bases. But he then appears to have lost the argument as well, meaning that on Sunday morning, Healey had to face the TV cameras, unable to say whether the UK did or didn't back the bombing. Those who know John Healey know that he tends to talk pretty straight. It was noticeable, I think, that there was a degree of hesitation in the way that he presented events on Sunday when we look back at that. Now, this all meant that Keir Starmer was outflanked by a coalition that he's usually keen to keep in place when things get really heated internationally. Mark Carney in Canada and Anthony Albanese in Australia, both leaders of centre-left governments who openly backed the attack. So with some caveats in the case of Carney, but in the end did back it. So Starmer's allies dispute some elements of this account, it should be said, Sam. A senior government official told Playbook the reporting is wrong and that there had been a different and specific ask, in quotes, from the US to use British bases for purely defensive strikes that came in subsequently, although that wouldn't rule out there having been a row in the first place, if you catch my drift. And clearly there was some sort of standoff initially about the use of the bases.
That's right. Look, I think this is an important piece, and it does sort of change things a bit in terms of how we see things and the power dynamics. So there's going to be a fight today over Tim's piece. And I note that you say that some government sources have denied elements of it to Playbook.
I am relentlessly even-handed.
No. I just want to help listeners a little bit, though, with how to decode some denials when they come, because I've been putting in calls and messages about this piece since it dropped last night. And so, first of all, I've got two government sources saying that it chimes with everything that they've heard, right? So I've got people saying Tim is right, broadly. Secondly, it is an incredibly nuanced and detailed piece. And those pieces are not 100% wrong ever. And Tim is a fantastic journalist. Thirdly, and this is really important, Anne, Downing Street have released a statement about Tim's piece. It doesn't deny it at all. It just says we don't comment on national security meetings, and the decision had the full support of Cabinet. And we're also being asked to reflect that some of the requests came in on Saturday, not Friday, when the key meeting that Tim writes about took place. But there's no denial that the meeting took place or that the contents are as it is. And there's no denial from various of the key actors involved. So to my mind, having put in a lot of checks, one anonymous source kind of taking a pop in one place. There's been a lot of contact between me and various members of the government, and that isn't the overall feeling I'm getting. And I've got people saying, no, this all stacks up. So I would take a lot of this really quite seriously. There was a widespread recognition that Britain wasn't going to take part in the conflict because we knew it was coming, more or less. And there was a lot of thought amongst our allies about the sort of extent to which we might be able to do. But there was just this discomfort. And in the end, the politics of our relationship with America was at the heart of the Friday National Security Council meeting. And overall, the balance was that we don't help rather than we do. And I just think that's really significant.
Absolutely. And it has led to a place also where there's this rift now clearly opened up, and Donald Trump punching the bruise when he talked about Starmer as no Churchill. So it also, in essence, pointing to some sort of vacillation or weakness. And I agree that is stood up in the piece that we're talking about. Most of the denials do seem to be focusing on subsequent meetings rather than dealing with the one which is at the heart of this account. You can also see some of our allies starting to express discomfort in public about Britain's position. The Cyprus High Commissioner, Kyriakos Kouros, was sounding furious about the lack of British action to defend RAF Akrotiri on Skye, saying that Greek forces were present on the island, the French were coming. The least we expect is that the British are present.
Yeah, this is a wider problem, that a wider knock-on effect of where we've ended up. The Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, even the Canadians are all asking, what side are you on, according to The Spectator. That element of it also leads the Times front page today. I think there's particular consternation in the Gulf because there are just so many British citizens living in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And on Tuesday, only then did it emerge that HMS Dragon will deploy 20 days after the first US request for support. Now, we did have at one point some submarines, Astute-class submarines in the region, sort of near Australia, which could be used. And it passed through the Gulf area a few weeks ago and could have been used as a contingency, the Spectators say. But again, our assets at the moment don't seem to be particularly, not many of them seem to be particularly useful in the region. And this is just, again, leading people that we have a very close defence and security relationship with in that part of the world to go, what are you up to?
The oil price spike and the potential knock-on effects of that are causing a lot of concern too around Westminster. Some of my Politico colleagues hearing that Ed Miliband has already held meetings with representatives from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, and with BP and Shell about global energy markets in recent days. And there is a quote there from an official saying that there's a hope of protecting consumers for a while because the energy price cap for the next 3 months has only just kicked in, but acknowledging that there would be pressure to replicate the scheme that was drawn up after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But that is, of course, all a big drain on the Treasury if it goes that way.
This is where the whole story comes to domestically. Do you remember the energy price guarantee that Liz Truss offered the public in September 2022? That ended her premiership because it was so expensive. This is an incredibly perilous area, but the politics are perilous whatever the way you look. Yes, it's true to say the energy price cap will now be fixed until July, but it's reviewed for July, and that's the moment of danger. And all of this could bleed alarmingly quickly into our politics. So there is the current rate is set until July, but we will probably know either just after or maybe even just before the local elections in early May what that rate it'll be fixed like in July is. There are all sorts of analysts like Cornwall which put a price on it. So we could know of a huge spike in the energy costs even before the local elections. Basically, analysts right now and over the next week or two will be able to see whether or not stuff's going through the roof. And if we are pushed into a world where families cannot afford their energy bills, the government will have to do something. But because, as you say, the public finances are so bad, could it just be, for instance, targeted on people like on universal credit? Could there be a one-off payment? Could they hope that maybe the summer carries it through and in the end Donald Trump backs down? All of these things are likely to be in the mix. One government source said to me that some of the very, very early contingency discussions, if things go really badly wrong in the Middle East, actually resemble some of the contingency plans that were made for a no-deal Brexit and laid out in those Yellowhammer documents. There's quite a lot of gloom in parts of Whitehall about just how bad this could get in a worst-case scenario. We don't know that's what's going to happen, but there is thought to kind of trade routes really seizing up and what they do then.
All of this on a very busy day in Westminster, not helped perhaps by the fact that a lot of the broadcast world has sore heads after the Royal Television Society Journalism Awards last night, where Sky got News Channel of the Year. You were there, Sam. Congratulations to you and the colleagues.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Also a massive congratulations to my good friend Channel 4's Gary Gibbon, who picked up the category that you'd care about if you listen to this politics, this podcast, the politics category. He's an amazing journalist and an incredibly kind guy, so I'm thrilled for him. Also, kudos to you, Anne. You are now officially, but we do this anyway, you are one of the most significant women in Westminster, and rightly receiving that gong yesterday. I couldn't help but notice when you look at the website that you are next to Blaise Metrawelli from MI6. So that might be alphabetical, but it's still fun to see you two side by side. Okay, just looking down the agenda, we've got stalled flights from the Middle East coming back to the UK. We've got a massive speech by Shabanna Mahmood, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But actually, there's a big event in Westminster last night, and the departure of Morgan McSweeney, his party in the heart of Westminster, and you've got some details about that.
Yeah, if you wanted a party for the most intrigue, that would definitely be an opening event in the inevitable Netflix drama about this government, you would have headed last night to the do for the departed Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. He had his send-off in a pub, quite a modest location in Westminster. Starmer himself was present and made a gushing speech along the lines of, we come to praise Morgan, not to bury him, but he's gone anyway. According to a witness, the PM saying that he was not only one of the best political strategists in the country, but in the entire world. I mean, why stop there? He said that Morgan had worked with him for the best part of a decade. He had the plan, strategy and foresight to change Labour so that Labour could change the country. Upbeat there from the Prime Minister. So many people in that room, special advisors, some key ministers and officials must have been silently thinking, how is that going?
I've been thinking that Keir Starmer was just ever so slightly, in personal terms, quite an awkward guy. And given that Morgan McSweeney has basically been ejected from the administration, it's quite sort of awkward to hear the gushing praise. If he's such a good political strategist, how did we end up in the situation that necessitated his removal? There was another detail in the account that I was really struck by, which is that some people were moved to tears by the Morgan speech. And it just reminds you that actually there were a lot of Morgan McSweeney loyalists in the government, people who thought the world of him, advisors who are dotted all around the place and so on. And that was a bit of a contrast. That is a bit of a contrast to Keir Starmer himself, who doesn't have an army of long marchers and isn't very good at motivating a core team around him. He's just sacked too many people, lost too many people, flip-flopped too many times for there to be people who have been with him all his relatively short political career. And it sounds like that contrast was on display last night. Yeah,
I should say I lifted my account of this from really excellent telling of who was there, etc., in Playbook. And it struck me reading that this morning that, as you reflect as well, Sam, what it highlighted is a gap. This is an extraordinary turnout when you look at the number of people who were there and wanted to be seen to be there for Morgan McSweeney. That may also account for that perhaps somewhat over-the-top tribute by the Prime Minister. I don't mean that it was over the top about Morgan McSweeney's skills, but it did raise that question: if he's so great, why is he going? But I think the fact that there were so many people, it jammed into that room of all levels of seniority, that it does raise the question, what now? What happens when everybody goes back to their desks this morning? Who is going to replace Morgan? It doesn't look like there's going to be anybody of anything like the same heft. And that was what I took from that.
The political editor of the New Statesman, Alva Ray, suggesting that all of that is not going to be dealt with until after May. It depends what the world looks like after May. And if there's a new incoming chief of staff after May, in the middle of what we anticipate to be quite a lot of tumult, I'm not sure that, working out what your login is and, where your photographs on your desk go is perfect timing for what could be sort of all-out political warfare inside the top of the Labour Party. Shall we move on to another big thing today? Shabanna Mahmood doubling down on her immigration plans today. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, she's back from Copenhagen, all amped up to follow the pretty hardline Danish model when it comes to asylum and the terms of entry and staying in a country when given refuge. Now, she hopes that will prove as popular in Britain as it has for Mette Frederiksen, the Danish leader whose government is in trouble in all sorts of ways. And she's going for early elections. But the one thing Frederiksen is able to say to her electorate is, I sorted this out. And there is a desire at the heart of Labour to do something similar. So the Home Secretary will today lay a statutory instrument in Parliament that would give powers to remove support payments and accommodations from asylum seekers who illegally work in the black economy, or who are deemed able to support themselves, or who have broken the law. Asylum support and accommodation will become conditional, she will say, reserved for those who play by our rules. She'll be hosted by IPPR at 11 this morning. A lot of migration charities and think tankers present who will be critical of her approach. Tonally, this is one to watch, isn't it? How does she go about making the argument when we've been spun really firmly in advance that it's going to be a tough message on policy?
Yeah, lots of people watching the tone. Because you saw Lucy Powell, Deputy Labour leader, object to both the tone and the substance of Shabanna Mahmood's plans in an Observer interview at the weekend. I picked up last night already some of the social media around this from the Home Office is just rattling Labour MPs. I didn't find much of a revolt a few days ago brewing around the plans, but I think there are these reports that Shabanna Mahmood's been told to rein in her rhetoric, although I don't think her team would see it as that. And I do just question kind of where this is going to end up, because this is possibly now, ahead of things like the courts bill, which comes back on Tuesday, and send reform, where we haven't really had the detail. This is possibly the number one flashing target for a revolt in the House of Commons in the coming weeks and months.
And indeed, the Home Office pains to stress that there's a middle ground message here by putting out rather different approaches and accounts of these shifts to different audiences. On Mahmood's own X account, she has one post on Wednesday pushing Britain as an open, tolerant and generous country, where she will be opening further safe and legal routes for refugees, though we don't really know much about how that is going to work in practice and who would qualify for that. But she has then later posted that refugee status is now temporary, and it is that changing of the tone about how welcoming the government is the whole idea of refugee status and who would qualify for it that I think is causing some nerves across Labour. And that's why what the tone of what she says is important. But in the end, you can't really get around the fact that if you've changed the conditionality, you've changed a lot of the way that the system works. And that is probably what is going to trigger, as you suggest, I think, an ongoing argument in Labour about, is this the way they want to go? And the more progressive wing of the party, I don't think are going to be very happy with what they hear this morning.
Two big things are changing at the moment. The first of all is that the net migration numbers are coming down, although I think quite clearly the small boats problem hasn't been solved. But also just public attitudes are ever so slightly, they're not softening, because people are as critical of immigration and the lack of benefits of immigration as they were 6-9 months ago. But the one bit of polling that I've got does actually suggest that reform's advantage on the issue of illegal migration is actually contracting. People in September thought that if Reform was in government, they'd be doing much better on the issue of small boats by a margin of 21 points. That was their lead. That's dropped now to 11 points. It's basically halved. There's just a little softening in the confidence that Nigel Farage's party is definitely the right answer to all of that. And I think that just slightly also constricts the Home Office's ability to be absolutely ultra hardline, although they'll be making the point, look, public opinion goes up and down, and if we don't actually solve the fundamental problem, it'll just roar back into life. But that is a context that critics of this, I suspect, might seize on.
And she's going to lay out two competing sort of nightmare visions, isn't she, in her eyes, Shabanna Mahmood, of how this could go wrong. I noticed a detail in some of the briefing, Sam, that she's going to argue that failing to deal with what she thinks remains one of voters' top priorities would mean there's no space for Labour values. Have you noticed how this phrase Labour values is now becoming a sort of trigger word for a big debate about the direction of the government and what it means to be Labour when you've got on one side Nigel Farage pulling up the drawbridge. She's going to use that phrase. I think that's attributed to her in the briefings. And on the other, you've got Zach Polanski and the Greens conjuring up what the Home Office is saying is a fairy tale of open borders, and that wouldn't wash with voters and wouldn't be a good thing. But it's interesting, she says, if you want your Labour values, you've got to follow me on asylum and immigration. That's kind of showing quite some front and in the argument. A lot of the purveyors of the Labour values narrative might say, hang on a minute.
Look, everybody, absolutely everybody is united on one thing, which is that overstaying without permission is a bad thing. What do you think we're doing, Anne?
We massively overstayed our welcome.
So let's bring the curtain crashing down. Do the curtains crash down? We crash down. Let's bring everything down to a close for this week. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on what has been an exceptional week at home and abroad. We'll be back on Monday, so we'll see you then.
See you on Monday.